Spicer wrapping up a pretty broad press conference there with the media. He talked a little in the beginning about the media's relationship with the White House and the FBI. They talked about Obamacare. They talked, of course, about the budget, which is a biggie right now, and gave a bit of a preview of what to look forward to tomorrow night. I'm Trish Regan. Welcome everyone to the Intelligence Report. Joining me right now, political analyst and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, American Majority CEO Ned Ryan, and Dan Gaynor from the Media Research Center. Good to see all you guys. Dan, I'm going to start with that rather contentious beginning to this press conference where you heard Sean Spicer defend what the White House said to the FBI, which was basically, look, you guys are telling us this story about these relationships between Trump campaign people and Russia are not true, so go ahead and tell the press that. What's your thought on all of that and the fact that the press continues to make such a big deal about these allegations, which, as Spicer said, are nothing new?
Well, yeah, the press has been doing everything it can to paint Russia as, the dominant figure in the Trump election because basically they still look for somebody to blame. They told everybody that Trump would lose, and he won, and they keep pointing fingers.
But they did this back during the campaign, right? I mean, didn't we hear all about Paul Manafort and the fact that he'd been a consultant in the Ukraine and had these ties to Russia, and all of this stuff was out there. It didn't seem as though anything was tremendously new, but now, of course, the new wrinkle in the story, and Sean Spicer's trying to defend the White House here, saying, look, if it's not true, and he says to the FBI, you're telling us it's not true, so why don't you tell the press that? The press is having issue, or taking issue, I should say, Dan Gaynor, with the fact that he's asking them to do that in the first place. Do you find that at all odd?
No, I mean, he laid it out very clearly there. He's not trying to set up something. His job as press secretary is to be the intermediary between the press and the administration. So when reporters ask questions and they say, well, who else can we talk to? It's his job to say, hey, can they talk to you? Can they talk to that person? They want this to be contentious because that's just basically their role. They've decided after 8 years asleep at the switch, now they want to fight with an administration.
Well, they weren't necessarily asleep at the switch. You could argue that they kind of liked who was in office at the time, perhaps, and they liked a lot of the policies. And now things are certainly very different. Let me turn to the money issue. We're talking about a budget that's going to come forward here, and Donald Trump, Ned Ryan, wants to increase defense spending by 10% to the tune of $54 billion, but simultaneously wants to make sure that there's no increase in the deficits. In other words, the money's got to come from somewhere. So where do you think, Ned Ryan, he's going to take the money from?
That's a great question, Trish. I mean, he can't have everything. At some point, he has to decide something's got to give. Of course, I'm all for building up the defense. Again, I'm not into nation building, but I think that our military does need to be built up. But I think that Trump's going to have to look at and understand, okay, I can't get everything, and he's going to have to prioritize what do I really, really want? Do I want to put a lot of money into the military spending? Do I want the infrastructure bill? At some point, where does the money come from? The taxpayers are the ones that obviously fund our federal government. We can't be increasing taxes here. So I think the thing that's always interesting to me about government is government seems to think that it can always increase its spending, 5% basically every year. Whereas in the real world, corporations have to say, we're not really sure our revenue is going to go up the next year.
I appreciate you saying this because, I once got in a very heated argument with a former OMB gentleman about this very issue because I agree with you. I think of it like a household, right? I'm curious to hear Leslie's view on this, too. I think about it like a household. And basically, you don't just increase your spending because you assume you're going to make that much more money every year. No,
exactly.
In fact, if anything, you should be trying to reduce your spending, regardless of how much money you may make in the coming year. But, the left doesn't think that way, Leslie. Why not start to?
Well, I think if you just look at what the president is proposing, remember it is a proposal. I mean, Congress has to greenlight this. The bottom line here is right now we have very tense relationships with both China and Iran. When you look at a 9% increase in spending with the defense, you're definitely looking at possible not only shipbuilding, warship building, and placement of those ships in the China Seas and in the Strait of Hormuz, which is definitely going to further irritate those two nations. 120 former generals and other military experts today said that they were concerned about the president's proposal to decrease money for foreign aid and diplomacy overseas, because they feel that goes hand in hand with an increase in defense spending, especially.
Okay, so you're telling me you don't think there's any way,
in Afghanistan
shape,
and
form,
Iraq, this money is bad.
No
this
how, no way can we manage
to
actually reduce spending in other places, because we need it here, there, and everywhere. I want to bring Brad Lakeman into the conversation in as well. He's former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. And I know you've got some fiscal conservatism running through your veins there when it comes to all this spending. Brad, how do you have your cake and eat it too in this administration? Can Donald Trump pull it off? Can he actually slash expenses in enough departments to make up for the increase in spending in defense?
If anybody can do it, Donald Trump can do it, because look, it's you can't rob Peter to pay Paul anymore, and you have to get your cabinet together. This is called shared sacrifice, and it's going to be a choice between wants and needs. There are a lot of cabinet agencies that want a lot of stuff. The question is, what do you need to provide the best services for the money that's provided? And you know what? There's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. There's also a lot of choice in government. There's a lot of things that government likes to do that they don't do very well. And the president already started by executive order and reducing regulation, things that is under his control, to start stripping away the burdens of government. So I believe Donald Trump's going to get the heads of his departments together. He's going to tell them it's time for tough love, shared sacrifice. You come back to me and tell me what you can live with.
In fact, that's what they communicated today. Sean Spicer said, look, we're leaving it up to the departments. We're not going to throw numbers out there, and we're going to give them the opportunity to come back to us. One thing that struck me as interesting is, and you heard in that conversation, one reporter said, look, Nancy Pelosi is saying here Donald Trump is in office, and he has yet to propose a jobs bill. Sean Spicer came back with, well, look, and Ned, I'll give this one to you. He's saved thousands of jobs already through these meetings with CEOs. He has communicated that he wants lower taxes to also help create jobs. And what struck me as interesting in all that is that Nancy Pelosi is saying we need a jobs bill, and Sean Spicer and Donald Trump are saying, no, we need policies that help create jobs. What's the distinction?
No, that's right. But if I could really quick, just go back to the previous point. When you see reports coming out of the Pentagon that there's been $25 billion wasted in a 5-year period, before we start throwing money willy-nilly at something, I'd really like us to take a hard look at where that money's actually going, is it being used effectively, before we start throwing new money at it. But back to this issue, again, this is the left versus right. Where do jobs come from? How are jobs created? Jobs are not created by the government. Government has to get out of the way. And I thought Spicer made actually a really good point. Again, government doesn't create the jobs. It's the regulation, government regulation, that stifles the jobs. So let's get regulation out of the way. So
I think we actually have a clip for the viewers, so we can just jog their memory here. Let's watch right now Sean Spicer responding on this issue of Nancy Pelosi's jobs bill.
The meetings and the actions that the president has taken on both regulatory and other matters have helped spur job creation. You've heard these companies come in over and over again. The automakers, the airlines, Sprint. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of people saying to the president, because of your agenda, because of your vision, we're willing to commit to hiring additional people, to manufacturing more. That's how jobs are created. I would just say that you haven't seen anything yet.
He also, let me add, and said government doesn't create jobs. Companies, people, we do. We create the jobs. Leslie, look, I think there's some fundamental differences, perhaps, in the way Nancy Pelosi and her team approach economic growth and the way this team is approaching economic growth. Do you take issue with the fact that there's no jobs bill like she does?
Yes, and I also think that Sean Spicer actually said it very well, which is you ain't seen nothing yet. And no, we haven't seen nothing yet, although some companies have said, oh, we're going to create these jobs. One, have we seen them created? And two, do they offset the number of jobs that are still going overseas, whether it be to Mexico, Bangladesh, China, even Trump's own companies that are overseas? So the promises that the president made with regard to the economy and jobs growth, which I think most people voted for him for, I don't see it.
The way
it
our
isn't just
deals
a
are
policy
currently
issue,
structured. No, but it is a policy issue. In other words, there's no incentive for companies not to try and export those jobs overseas right now. That's starting to change, and it's starting to change simply with rhetoric. If I'm a CEO running a big manufacturing company, I mean, let's think about Hasbro, for example, and Play-Doh, right? Great example. This came out over the weekend. Guess what? Play-Doh, which was originated right here in the United States of America, they're going to start making Play-Doh for my kids and your kids in Massachusetts again. Imagine that, as opposed to overseas. I mean, I think there are a lot of parents out there, Brad, that would opt to pay a little bit more for the Play-Doh, knowing that it was made in the U.S. and knowing that they don't have to worry about any chemicals from a Chinese plant or this, that, and the other. And I wonder how much of this is just them saying, all right, we want to do this right now, and how much of it is a response, a preemptive response to anything that this president might put forward.
Right. It's a carrot and the stick. This president, I think, is going to be very famous for using that. By the way, it's in his book, The Art of the Deal, that he wrote back in '87. There's no mystery to Donald Trump if you read his 11-point principles of making a deal. And look, patriotism is a big part of what a president does. He creates the environment by which people feel confident. And appealing to patriotic
And yet no one wants to give him credit
good,
for that, right, Dan Gaynor?
Yeah.
No one wants to give him credit. They only see this as somehow discriminatory against other countries.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, basically, Trump has been doing the big agenda, trying to talk jobs, 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 and the media want to talk about everything but. He's talked to unions, he's talked to CEOs. Every single day he's trying to push, a jobs agenda, and it's by going after regulation. And the media, they don't want it to their topic. You even look at the presser today; they want to talk about other things. Trump is focused.
Why is that?
I think we'll see a lot of it when he talks tomorrow night.
Why? I mean, is it that? I mean, I have a view that sometimes it's a little too complicated for them, frankly. And when you start talking about economic policy, their eyes start to glaze over, and so they're choosing the easy way out. What do you think, Dan? There may be something even more to this than that.
Well, I think talking jobs is an optimistic viewpoint, and they don't want to do that. If they keep talking jobs, it makes it sound like that's something positive. That's what people voted for. They want to tear down this administration, and they're working overtime to do so. And jobs doesn't figure into that program.
I gotcha. Well, you know what? It'll be great when we continue to see these jobs being added, when we start to see some GDP numbers that are worth printing. We already have a stock market that's on a tear, so that's good news there. Leslie, Ryan, Ned Ryan, Brad, Dan, good to see all of you guys. Thank you so much. I want to point out that tomorrow, it's a biggie, right?